The ship did not land. It fell. The IT came down hard across the outer ridge of Durith, scraping rock and throwing up a wall of dust that drifted for half a kilometer before settling. Sergeant Dara Wolf was the first to reach it. She had been running perimeter checks when the ridge sensor screamed. By the time she got there, the hull was still hot. The side door had been blown off from the inside. Someone had forced it in a hurry. She found him 20 meters from the wreck. A Yarn, old by the look of him, gray plating along the neck, joints swollen, one eye already clouded over. He was trying to crawl forward on his hands and knees and not managing it well. When he heard her boots on the gravel, he stopped and looked up. "Humans," he said. His voice was like gravel in a dry pipe. "Good. You will at least listen." Wolf crouched beside him. "What happened to your ship?" "The Vreth happened." He coughed. "They're 3 days behind me. Maybe 2 now." She called it in immediately. Private Sully Rand arrived with a stretcher 2 minutes later, eyes wide, clearly not expecting to be carrying an alien elder before noon. Lieutenant Bram Cole came jogging after him, took one look at the wreck, and let out a low whistle. "Big crash," Cole said. "Big problem," Wolf replied. They carried the Yarn inside. His name was Avos. He was an elder of the Yarn Collective, and he had been running from the Vreth Dominion for 11 days. He said this calmly, the way someone speaks when they've already made peace with how bad things are. Dr. Nadia Foss worked on his injuries while he talked. She had to ask him twice to slow down because he kept trying to sit up. Commander Oren Tash stood at the foot of the bed and listened without interrupting. That was one of the things Wolf respected about him. He never rushed a briefing. Avos told them about the gravity spike array. He said the Vreth had been building it for 6 years in secret. It was not a beam weapon or a bomb. It was a field generator. Portable units, carried in their advanced ships, that could be deployed on any open terrain within hours. Once active, the array projected a localized gravity field across a wide area. The field ran at 8 to 12 times the standard gravity of most inhabited worlds. That he paused to let that settle. 8 to 12 times, Tash repeated. Yes. Avos looked at him steadily. At that pressure, bones collapse. Hearts fail. Organs compress. Any infantry caught inside the field dies within 4 minutes. Ground vehicles flip and crush. The Vreth simply wait outside the field boundary until it's done. Then they walk in. Sully Rand had gone very still near the doorway. Avos continued. The Yarn Collective had lost 3 planets to the array already. Each time, their armies had deployed, the field had activated, and nothing had come back out. The Vreth did not negotiate before using it. They did not warn. They turned it on, and they waited. How long does a single deployment last? Tash asked. The field holds for approximately 20 minutes at full output. Long enough. Avos closed his good eye for a moment. We had faster soldiers, better armor. We had ships with more firepower than theirs. None of it helped. You cannot fight what is crushing you from every direction at once. The room was quiet. Wolf looked at the data Dr. Foss was pulling up on her pad. Gravity tolerances, species comparisons, standard field output charts. Foss was scrolling fast, cross-referencing things, her jaw tight with concentration. Tash was already moving toward the planning table. We have 2 days to prepare. Cole, I want defensive positions mapped along the basin approach. Rand, give me full head count and equipment status by tonight. Both of them moved. Avos reached out and caught Tash's sleeve. His grip was surprisingly firm for someone who had just been scraped off a gravel ridge. "Commander," he said quietly, "I have brought warnings to 4 other species before coming here. 2 of them had larger armies than yours, better equipment, more time to prepare." He held Tash's gaze. "They're gone now. Do not waste time on positions and head counts. There is no position that survives a gravity field." Tash looked at the old alien's hand on his sleeve. Then he looked at Foss. Foss had stopped scrolling. She was staring at her pad with an expression Wolf had learned to recognize after 3 years of working alongside her. It was not panic. It was not excitement. It was the very specific look Nadia Foss made when numbers said something that should not be possible. She looked up slowly. "Sir," she said, "I need everyone to stay in this room for a few more minutes." Tash nodded. Foss turned her pad around so they could all see the screen. On one side, was the Vreth GSA output range. On the other side was a small blue planet, third from a yellow star, listed in the Galactic Atlas under the most boring possible entry: Earth. Standard surface gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. The Vreth built this weapon with a specific ceiling, Foss said. Her voice was careful, like she was still checking her own math as she spoke. They build it to the point where every known species fails. Every species they have ever encountered. She tapped the screen. But they have never encountered a species that came from here. Nobody spoke. Wolf looked at the numbers. Then she looked at the GSA output range again. She started to understand. Talk to us, Foss. Tash said. Foss took a breath. I think, she said, we may be the only army in this galaxy that can walk through their weapon. Nobody laughed. Nobody said Foss was wrong. That alone told Wolf how seriously they were all taking it. Foss pulled the data onto the wall screen so everyone could see it clearly. She moved through it without rushing, pointing at numbers, pulling up comparison charts, laying it all out the way she always did when she needed people to follow her thinking and not just trust her conclusion. The Vreth gravity spike array had a measured output range of 9 to 11 times standard gravity. That was the ceiling. That was the point at which every known species showed complete physical failure. Cardiovascular collapse, skeletal fracture, internal organ compression. Avas confirmed it from the bed. Every species the Vreth had ever tested it against fell within the first 2 minutes. But Foss had pulled up the human data. Earth's surface gravity sat at 9.8 meters per second squared. That was already among the highest of any inhabited world on record. Most species in the galactic catalog lived on planets between 0.6 and 0.8 standard. A few reached 1.2. Humans lived at the high end of survivable, and their biology had shaped itself around that fact across millions of years. Dense bones, strong hearts, muscles built for resistance, circulatory systems that had learned to push blood upward against real weight. And then there was the training that Wolf's unit was not a standard infantry squad. They had been cycled through the high-G combat program 18 months earlier. Centrifuge drilling, load-bearing endurance work at 4 times standard gravity, pressure suit conditioning. The program had been designed to prepare soldiers for boarding operations on heavy gravity vessels. Most of them had qualified at sustained 6G tolerance. A few had pushed past 8. Foss pointed at those numbers and let the room do the math. At 9GS, she said, you slow down. Movement becomes very hard, but your hearts keep beating and your bones stay whole. At 10GS, it gets serious. Reaction time drops. You cannot run, but trained soldiers in proper G-suits can remain conscious and functional for short bursts. She paused. At 11, you're in pain. You are moving through what feels like solid air, but you are still moving. Suli Rand raised his hand from the corner. He looked like he was trying very hard not to show how frightened he was and not entirely succeeding. How long is a short burst? He asked. The field runs for 20 minutes, Foss said. I think experienced soldiers, suited and prepared, can manage 10 to 15 minutes of movement inside it. Enough to cross the deployment zone and reach the emitter units. And destroy them, Tash said. Yes. Cole leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. So the plan is to walk into the thing that kills everyone. The plan, Tash said, is to walk through the thing that kills everyone, reach the machines making it, and blow them apart. Yes. Cole nodded slowly. Right. Walk through instant death. Classic Tuesday. Rand did not look comforted. They spent the next 4 hours running simulations. Foss modeled human physiological response at each gravity increment. Tash and Wolf mapped the approach vectors across the Durith Basin, calculating how far the squad would need to travel inside the field before reaching the GSA emitter cluster. Based on Avas's description of standard Vreth deployment formations, the emitters would be placed at the center rear of the field zone. Approximately 600 meters from the field boundary point, 600 meters at 11 times gravity. Wolf had done the centrifuge runs. She knew what that felt like. It was not something she wanted to repeat. It was absolutely something she was willing to do. She worked through the squad list carefully with Tash. They needed soldiers who had completed the High G program and had the physical profile to handle sustained pressure. Cole was the obvious first choice. He was built like a piece of industrial equipment and had a resting heart rate that a physician had once described as unsettlingly low. Rand was younger and less experienced, but his conditioning scores were excellent, and they needed the numbers point 0.4 more soldiers rounded out the team. All of them had the qualifications. All of them said yes without being asked twice. Foss fitted everyone with updated G-suits from the base stores. She recalibrated the pressure systems herself, one by one, muttering calculations under her breath. Avas watched from his bed, still and quiet, tracking every movement in the room. When she was done with the last suit, he spoke. "You're truly going to attempt this?" "Yes." Wolf said. He was silent for a long time. "I have watched the Vreth deploy that weapon 11 times. I have never seen anything come out of the field alive." "You have never watched humans go in," Wolf said. Avas looked at her for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite hope, more like the very careful beginning of it. The way a man who has been cold for a long time holds his hands near a fire before trusting it will not go out. Then the perimeter alarm lit up the entire base. Tash moved to the sensor board. His face was unreadable as he read the incoming data. "They are early," he said. 2 hours out. Not 2 days. The room went sharp and still. "Then we go now," Wolf said. She picked up her helmet. Cole was already at the door. Rand was on his feet, pale but steady, hands locked around his rifle out of habit more than need. Outside, across the flat, dark basin of Durith, the Vreth advance force was coming. And somewhere in their fleet, Gravity Engineer Sol was already running the activation sequence for a weapon that had never once failed to empty a battlefield. He had not been told who was waiting on the other side. The Vreth army came out of the dark like a slow tide. They did not rush. They never rushed. That was the thing about a force that carried the gravity weapon. They had no reason to hurry. They deployed in wide formation across the basin floor, vehicles at the flanks, infantry filling the center. At the rear of the column, 6 heavy transport units rolled into position and stopped. Their side panels folded open. The gravity spike array emitters rose from the beds on hydraulic arms, angling skyward, locking into place one after another. From the ridge, Wolf watched through her scope. 6 emitters, she said quietly. Same spacing Avas described. 600 meters to the nearest one once the field activates, Cole said beside her. He was checking his G-suit seals for the 3rd time. Not for nerves. From habit, Subcommander Reth Ol stood at the front of the Vreth line and surveyed the terrain with the flat patience of someone who had done this many times before. He had watched the GSA work on 4 different worlds. The sequence was always the same. The enemy formed up. The field activated. The enemy stopped moving, then stopped entirely. Then the Vreth walked in. He gave the order to Gravity Engineer Sol. Sol initiated the sequence from the control station at the rear. The emitter arms hummed. A low vibration moved through the ground that the Vreth soldiers felt in their feet. Then the air above the basin shimmered, the way heat rises off stone in summer, except it rippled in every direction at once, and the shimmer did not stop. The field was live. Wolf felt at the moment it reached the ridge. It hit like someone had draped a heavy wet blanket across every surface of her body at the same time. Her knees bent slightly without her telling them to. Her neck muscles fired hard to keep her head up. Beside her, she heard Rand make a short, tight sound. "On your feet," she said. "Move." She stood. It took effort. Real effort. The kind that reminded her of the centrifuge runs back in training, that long, grinding sensation of weight pressing from all directions. She took her first step forward and felt every muscle in her legs fire at once just to lift her boot off the ground. She took another step. Behind her, the squad rose and moved. Cole first, then the others, then Rand last, jaw set, moving from the Vreth line. Reth Ol watched through his scope that he saw shapes on the ridge. Moving, he blinked. Adjusted the scope. Looked again. The shapes were still moving. Slowly, heavily, but moving. Downward, into the basin, into the active field zone, advancing directly toward the emitter line. Rethol had seen many things in his years of service. He had watched entire armies fold in the first 60 seconds of field activation. He had seen vehicles roll and crush their own crews. He had seen fortified positions crumble as the soldiers inside them stopped being able to breathe. He had never, not once, seen anything walk forward after the field came on. He called back to Sol. Check your output readings. Sol checked. Field is nominal. Full output, 9.8 GS across the basin floor. Rethol looked through the scope again. The shapes were still coming. Slower than normal movement. Labored, but deliberate. What are they? He said. It was not quite a question. Nobody answered. Inside the field, Wolf counted her steps. 60. 70. The ground felt like it was pushing up against her with both hands. Each breath was work. Her ribcage had to fight to expand. Her heart was pounding in a low, heavy rhythm, steady but loud. The G-suit was doing its job, compressing her lower body, pushing blood upward, keeping her brain fed. She did not look at the distance remaining. She looked at the next meter of ground. Cole moved up beside her. His face inside the visor was red and locked. He said nothing. He did not need to. Behind them, Rand was breathing in short, hard bursts. Not panicking, just working. His steps were uneven, but they were forward. 200 meters into the basin. The Vreth infantry began to react. They could see the squad clearly now. Rethol had already relayed what he was seeing to High Warlord Kavan aboard the command ship in orbit. Kavan had asked for the report to be repeated, then repeated again. Then he had gone silent. Sol pushed the output to maximum, 11.2 GS. Wolf felt the jump immediately. It was like a door had been pushed against her chest. She staggered one step sideways before catching herself. Someone behind her went to one knee. She did not turn to see who. She just said low and flat, "Get up." A beat of silence. Then the sound of boots scraping gravel. They got up. 300 meters. 400. The emitter towers were visible now, large and pale against the dark sky, their arms still angled up, the hum radiating out from them in waves that Wolf could feel in her back teeth. Suli Rand's visor cracked along the lower left corner. Not catastrophically, just a split in the outer layer from the sustained pressure. He kept walking. Cole's nose started to bleed somewhere around the 500-meter mark. He did not mention at 600 meters. The nearest emitter tower was right in front of them. Wolf reached it. She put one gloved hand flat against the base of it, just for a second, feeling the vibration running through the metal. This was a machine that had ended armies. This was the thing the Vreth had built to make resistance impossible. She unclipped the breech charge from her belt. She looked up at the tower. "You picked the wrong species," she said quietly. She pressed the charge against the base plate. She armed it. She pressed the detonator. The first tower came down in pieces. The breech charge blew the base clean, and the structure folded sideways, hitting the basin floor with a sound like a building falling. The emitter arm cracked off and tumbled. Dust and metal fragments scattered in every direction, and for a 3-second radius around the collapse, the gravity field stuttered. Wolf felt it like a hand briefly releasing its grip on her chest. Then the other 5 towers redistributed the load, and the grip came back. But something had changed. The field was uneven now, running harder in some patches and thinner in others, cycling as the remaining emitters tried to compensate for the lost unit. "Move," Wolf said. "All of us. Split, and take them fast." The squad spread across the emitter line. Cole went left, taking 2 soldiers with him. Wolf went right with Rand and 1 other. They moved faster now, not because the gravity was lighter, because they knew it could be done. That first tower had proved it. Sol saw it on his board at the same moment the second charge detonated. Tower 3 collapsed. The field lurched. His readouts spiked in 3 directions at once as the system tried to recalibrate, with 4 emitters doing the work of 6. He started typing fast, rerouting power, trying to stabilize, trying to keep the field intact. "They are destroying the array," he said, and his voice had lost the flatness it usually carried. Reth Ol was already moving. He ordered the forward Vreth infantry to advance into the basin and stop the squad before they reached the remaining towers. That was the mistake. The Vreth infantry moved into the field boundary at the moment the fourth tower blew. A gravity array running at full output on 6 emitters is a stable, even field. A gravity array running at full output on 2 emitters, with the other 4 freshly destroyed and their power lines severed in sequence, is not stable. The energy does not simply stop. It collapses. And when a high-output gravity field collapses fast, the energy displacement does not disappear evenly. It ripples outward. The backlash hit the advancing Vreth infantry like a wall. It was not 11 GS. It was not even 9, but it was uneven, surging, and it came in waves that the Vreth bodies were not built to absorb. Their lighter frames, built for 0.7 standard gravity, buckled under the fluctuating pressure. The first wave knocked a third of them off their feet. The second wave, seconds later, sent another third down. Those who stayed standing were staggering, disoriented, their equilibrium destroyed by the cycling field. Reth Ol watched his forward line collapse from the outside. He had ordered them into the kill zone of their own weapon. Tower 5 went down. Then 6. The field died completely. Wolf felt the pressure release all at once, like surfacing from deep water. She straightened up fully and breathed in hard, one long pull of air, and for a moment she just stood in the sudden lightness and let her body remember what normal felt like. Then she looked at the basin. The Vreth forward infantry were down or struggling. The soldiers who had taken the backlash directly were not moving. Those on the edges were trying to get up and not managing it quickly. Tash, she said into the comm, field is down. All 6 towers gone. Their forward line is scattered. Tash's voice came back immediately. Confirmed. Launching ground assault from the ridge now. On the command ship in orbit, High Warlord Kavan stood at the tactical display and watched the icons that represented his forward force stop moving. He watched the GSA indicators go dark one after another. He watched the human signatures inside the field zone, still moving, still active, still there. He turned to the nearest officer. What is the status of the array? The officer checked and looked back at him. Destroyed, my lord. All 6 units. Kavan looked at the display again. The human reinforcements were coming off the ridge now, moving fast, heading into the basin. Sol, he said quietly over the line to the field station, but Sol's response came back shaky. My lord, explain to me what just happened. A long pause. When Sol spoke, his voice was barely above a murmur. They walked through it, my lord. The field was at full output. I checked the readings 3 times. They simply walked. Kavan said nothing. Their physiology, Sol continued. I did not have accurate data on their homeworld. I did not know their gravity tolerance. I built the array to the threshold of every species we had encountered. Another pause. I never encountered them. Kavan stared at the display for a long moment. His forward force was broken. His reserve units were still outside the basin, intact, but the human reinforcements were already in the field and moving fast. The tactical picture had reversed in less than 20 minutes. Rethol's voice came over the line. My lord, I recommend we pull back and reassess. We can redeploy from a second position with no, Kavan said. Rethol went quiet. Kavan looked at the display. His pride looked at it too. He had brought the weapon that had ended 4 planetary defenses. He had broadcast a surrender demand to these humans personally. He had offered them a graceful end. Send in the reserves, he said. Rethol's hesitation lasted exactly 1 second. Yes, my lord. Below, in the basin, Dara Wolf heard the thunder of the reserve units beginning to move. She checked her rifle. Ran was beside her, visor cracked, nose bloody, still standing. Cole appeared out of the dust on her left, wiping his face with the back of one hand. More coming, Wolf said. Cole looked out at the approaching line. How many? Enough, she said. Let's go. The Vreth reserves were not a small force. They came in 3 columns across the basin, disciplined and fast, weapons up, moving with the kind of confidence that came from fighting alongside a weapon that had never failed them before. They outnumbered the human ground force by a wide margin. Kavan had made sure of that. He had planned for resistance. He had just not planned for the kind he was getting. Tash read the columns on his tactical board from the Ridge command post and made the call fast. Wolf, hold the center. Cole takes the left approach. Reserve squad covers the right flank and funnels them inward. Wolf acknowledged and moved. She pulled her team into a broken line across the basin center, using the destroyed emitter towers as cover. The wrecked metal gave good angles. She positioned Rand on the far right end of the line, behind the largest tower section, with clear sight lines down the middle column approach. Rand looked at the cover, then at the incoming force, then at Wolf. "How long do I hold here if they push the right side?" he asked. "Until Cole's team wraps around," she said. 6 minutes. Maybe 7. He nodded, settled in, did not ask anything else. The Vreth columns reached 400 meters and opened fire. The basin became loud very quickly. Wolf worked from cover, moving short distances between shots, keeping their attention on the center while Cole's team pushed hard along the left. The Vreth middle column was the largest, and it pressed forward aggressively, clearly aiming to punch through the center before the flanking moves could close out on the right side. The situation went bad almost immediately. The Vreth right column peeled a section off toward Rand's position. More soldiers than expected, pushing fast. Rand's comm clicked twice, which was a signal that he was engaged and busy. Then it went quiet. Wolf kept moving. She could not go to him. Cole was not in position yet. Rand worked the cover on his own. The soldiers coming at him were fast, and they had numbers, and he had 2 things they did not. He knew the terrain behind those tower sections better than they did, because he had just walked through a gravity field to get there, and he was not frightened of the situation the way he would have been an hour ago. Something had changed in him inside that field. He had already done the impossible thing today. This was just the next thing that he held the position for 7 minutes and 14 seconds. When Cole's team came around the left flank and hit the Vreth right column from behind, Rand was still there, out of ammunition for his primary weapon, using his sidearm, positioned behind the last piece of cover that still gave him a workable angle. When Cole appeared at the edge of his sight line, Rand exhaled so hard it fogged his cracked visor completely. "Took you long enough," he said. "Traffic was bad," Cole said, already moving past him to press the advantage at the center. The push broke. The Vreth middle column had been driving hard at Wolf's line when Tash committed the reserve squad from a ridge, sending them down fast at the column's right shoulder. The timing was clean. The column had committed too far forward, and when the pressure hit its exposed side, the formation lost coherence. Individual units started pulling back to cover. That was the moment Wolf moved her line forward. Not a charge. A steady advance. Controlled. Each soldier keeping coverage and moving in turns, pushing the Vreth back step by step across ground the Vreth had thought they would walk over unopposed in the command post on the ridge. Elder Avas sat upright in his recovery chair, watching the tactical feed on Dr. Foss's screen. He had not spoken in 40 minutes. Foss glanced at him twice during the engagement, and both times he was completely still, watching. She watched the vitals readouts for the squad at the same time. Every soldier in the field was operating well past comfortable physiological limits. Heart rates were high. Blood pressure was elevated. 2 soldiers were showing early fatigue markers. They had already survived a gravity field that should have killed them and were now fighting a force that outnumbered them. None of them had stopped. Foss noted that in her field log with the precise, careful handwriting she always used when something mattered. The encirclement closed 20 minutes after the reserves engaged. Tash had been building it patiently across the entire engagement, keeping pressure from 3 directions while appearing to hold position at the center. When the last column piece was in place, the Vreth reserve force found itself boxed on every side with no clean line of retreat across open ground. The basin geography did the rest. High walls to the north, wrecked emitter towers blocking the south approach. Human forces on the east and west at IT went quiet. Kavan opened a channel. Tash picked it up. Wolf heard it through the squad comm commander. Kavan's voice was flat, controlled, but something underneath it was not. "You will explain to me what you are." Tash was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking about how to answer honestly in few words. "We are from Earth," he said. "We have always survived what should have killed us." Another silence from the channel. Then Kuvan said, "I am initiating formal surrender protocol." The basin went very quiet. Wolf sat down on a piece of broken emitter housing and put her back against the metal. Her legs ached from the inside out, the deep bone-level soreness that only came after real sustained loading. Her hands were still steady. She noticed that and filed it away. Avas appeared at the ridge edge above her with Foss supporting his arm. He had insisted on coming down once the shooting stopped. He looked at the basin, at the broken towers, at the human soldiers scattered across the ground, sitting, checking equipment, not celebrating, just resting the way people rest when the work is done. He looked at Wolf for a long time. "We have studied 40 species," he said. 40 species across 60 years of contact and observation. He paused. "I have never seen anything like you." Wolf looked up at him. She was tired enough that she did not think carefully about her answer. "We get that a lot," she said. 3 weeks after the battle, the footage reached the Galactic Council. Not a summary. Not a report filed through the usual diplomatic channels. The actual sensor footage from Vreth forward scouts, recovered from Vreth Ol's command unit during the surrender processing. High-resolution, multi-angle, time-stamped. The council chamber was large enough to seat representatives from 9 species, and when the footage played on the central display, every seat was occupied and every eye was forward. The footage showed the basin. It showed the field activation, the shimmer in the air, the readings on the overlay confirming 9.8 GS across the entire zone. Then it showed the squad moving into it. Nobody in the chamber spoke. They watched Wolf's team descend the ridge and enter the field. They watched the slow, grinding, deliberate advance across 600 meters of crushed gravity. They watched the towers come down one by one. They watched the backlash scatter the Vreth forward infantry. They watched the field die. When the footage ended, a Yaren Council delegate from the Second Collective sat very still for several seconds. Then she turned to the human diplomatic representative seated across the chamber floor. "How?" she said. "Do you train for that?" The human ambassador was a retired soldier named Con Hadley. He was compact and gray-haired, with hands that had clearly spent decades doing physical work, and he had the particular quality of stillness that people develop after a long time in difficult places. He considered the question seriously for a moment. "We call it Tuesday," he said. 3 delegates asked for the phrase to be retranslated. Their translators confirmed it was accurate. 2 of them immediately submitted formal requests for military alliance with humanity before the session broke for recess. Dr. Foss's full xenophysics paper was published the same week under the title Gravity Tolerance in Terran Homo sapiens, a comparative study. She had been working on it since the night before the battle, finishing the last sections in the field command post while the engagement was still ongoing. It ran to 40 pages, included full physiological data, comparative species tolerance charts, and a detailed breakdown of how the Vreth GSA parameters had been calibrated to every known species except the one that had just destroyed IT. IT became the most accessed document in the Galactic Archives within 30 days of publication. Gravity engineer Sul read it twice in his holding cell. When a Vreth tribunal asked him what he would have done differently, he put the answer plainly. "I would have read more about Earth." He paused. "I would have started with the gravity." Vreth Ol, who had ordered his infantry into the collapsing field, was more blunt in his assessment. He submitted a formal post-action report to the tribunal stating that the engagement had failed not because of equipment failure, not because of tactical error, and not because of any intelligence gap that could reasonably have been anticipated. It had failed, he wrote, because the Vreth Dominion had assumed humanity was like every other species they had encountered. He underlined that sentence. He was not certain anyone would listen. He wrote it anyway. Kuvan gave no public statement. On Durith, things wound down with the quiet efficiency that follows military action. Equipment was cataloged. Damaged suits were logged for repair, and the broken emitter towers were eventually cleared by salvage teams. The basin went back to being a flat, unremarkable stretch of ground under an ordinary sky. Sully Rand was promoted 2 grades. He told Wolf, on a quiet afternoon near the ridge where they had first spotted Avas's ship coming down, that he wanted to stay in infantry. No postings. No safety assignments. She looked at him for a moment. "You held that position alone for 7 minutes, she said. 7:14, he said. "I counted." She nodded. That was good enough for her. Cole had the crack in Rand's visor mounted and framed, with a small placard beneath it that read simply, Durith Basin. He presented it to Rand at the unit's informal post-action gathering with the same flat expression he used for everything. Rand accepted it with the same expression. They understood each other. Avos stayed on Durith for another 2 weeks before his people sent a ship for him. He spent most of that time in quiet conversation with Dr. Foss, going through her paper section by section, asking careful questions, occasionally disagreeing with her framing on a point, and then agreeing once she walked him through the data. He was a good scientific mind, she noted. He had just spent too long watching things fail that on his last morning. He found Wolf at the edge of the ridge before dawn. She was standing there in the early gray light, looking out over the basin. Not brooding, just looking. He stood beside her. The sky was beginning to shift at the far edge, the first pale line appearing at the horizon. I'm going to record a statement for our historical archive, he said, about what I witnessed here. What will you say? She asked. He thought about it for a long moment. I will say that the Vreth made a common mistake. They measured humanity against other species. He folded his hands together. You cannot measure humanity that way. You can only measure it against the universe, against everything that has ever tried to end it. Stone and ice and deep water and hard sky and long hunger and short time. He paused. And gravity. Wolf looked out at the basin. The broken emitter housings were still out there, pale shapes in the low light. So far, Avos continued quietly, the universe is not one. She did not answer. There was nothing to add to that. Behind them, at the base of the ridge, the smell of breakfast was drifting up from the camp. Suli Rand appeared at the top of the path and called her name. His voice was easy, nothing urgent, just ready. She turned from the ridge. She walked back. That was all. That was enough.